Reflection? Reflection.
Just do the reflection.
And here's my reflection. Let's talk about the most problematic aspect of my media, work. So the technical side of things. We did have some issues with levels in recording. We found that there was whining noise throughout a lot of the second half of the recording, but we didn't have time to get our hands on a recorder. We decided to improv with our phones. So it definitely meant that there was a big difference between the beginning half of the recording quality and the second half. I found that we definitely spent more time developing our podcast content than we did on the technical side of things, and we definitely forgot that it is actually a viewer experience that we are primarily creating. I think the way that we addressed mediated authenticity was really strong and creative, because we could kind of talk about how that would look in practice without kind of directly just relating to research or something. So image imposter was sort of the way that we could talk about the benefits of it by being this is it in practice. How does what I learned plug in to a piece of research? Let me tell you. The research in YouTube reading actually has a few studies in it, like Berryman and Kafka's Crying on YouTube, which talks about this idea of perceived connectedness between beauty influencers and their fans. They talk about this in terms of an affective bond, so an emotional bond that takes place because the internet kind of has this idea of being really close and really privy to people's real lives. And this is so different to the scarcity, the distance and the privacy of common media forms. So the affordances of new media, YouTube, pieces to camera, kind of create this confessional ethos. Also, Hurton thinks that this online space creates the ability to kind of have a brand itself. Marwick also suggests that techniques of self-branding become performed by these micro-celebrities, so it becomes a marketing device to brand yourself, and this kind of entrepreneurial based thing requires someone to form this authentic brand. And obviously we talked about this in the idea of image imposter. Sound has a real ability to convey mood. Yeah, sound definitely provides a kind of more implicit and maybe complex way of conveying the mood of something. For our own project, because we made up an example of a YouTuber, the sound allowed the listener to piece together or participate in imagining the visual attributes of the people and the scandal that we talked about. For example, in the scene where Deborah D's reporting, you kind of hear the crunch of the leaves underfoot, you hear the cicadas thrumming in the background, you hear the jingle of a dog's bell, and that kind of places the person to sort of piece together what's going on and what Deborah D is referring to. And you can kind of hear the sounds to get a clue, but it's a lot of imagination, I think. I think that's something valuable I learned, is that you need to designate tasks early, because otherwise you'll fall into the trap of what we did, and we discussed for far too long what angle we wanted to take with the project in the big picture sense. What we really should have done was just get started and then be able to kind of exercise our individual liberty to kind of focus on certain things in the bit that we were designated. If group members' strengths have been discussed at the beginning of the project, then roles and tasks could have been assigned accordingly. This would have meant that the project would have developed more fairly in terms of people's strengths, so then it would be more efficient as well. The feedback from the class, so it kind of reminded me first and foremost that there's actually a listener who's listening to this, and their experience is most important. Our feedback was centered around evening out the levels and kind of not making it unpleasant. So we took steps to straighten out this level issue by making the character Imogen call into the interview to sort of kind of mask the kind of bad levels. This meant that the viewer expected and could justify the differences in the quality of the recordings. The class also said that at times the pacing of the podcast was quite jarring or didn't make sense. So we moved pieces of audio around to ensure that the conversation led to places that the listener would kind of be able to expect. We sort of made it more conversational. But yeah, that is all. Thin. Yeah, the end is hard to do.